Now tell me, you ever seen something so wrong it makes your teeth ache? Not an anger that flashes hot and quick, but a deep, grinding wrongness that settles in your bones. I have. I saw it in the dust-choked street of a town called Redemption, a place that had long forgotten the meaning of its own name. The sun was a hammer beating down on the cracked earth, and the air was thick with whispers and judgment. In the center of it all stood a woman, Ilara. She was more spirit than flesh, her clothes torn, her face a mask of shame carved by a cruel world. Clutched to her chest was a bundle of rags that held the faint, mewling cry of a baby. Before her stood Silas Blackwood, a man whose wealth was matched only by his rot. He smiled like a snake about to strike, proclaiming her a debtor, his property until her penance was paid. Men watched, their faces hard and unmoving. Women turned away, hiding behind their own fear. Then Ilara's voice, a dry crackle of sound, broke the silence. "Please? My baby is starving," and that's when another man appeared, stepping out of the shimmering heat. His name was Cale. He was Apache, and he was blind. You have to understand, a man like Cale didn't belong in a town like Redemption. He was a ghost from another time, a relic the world was trying to forget. He moved with a certainty that unnerved people who relied on their eyes, his head tilted, listening to the world's secret language. He navigated not by sight, but by the echo of his own footsteps, the shift in the air, the way the sun felt on his skin. He stopped before Blackwood, his face as unreadable as a stone tablet. Blackwood sneered, ready to dismiss him. But Cale held out a hand. In his palm lay 5 tarnished silver dollars. It was everything he had. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The offer hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Blackwood looked at the pittance, then at the woman, then at the silent, watching crowd. Pride and greed wrestled inside him. For a moment, it seemed he would refuse. But the weight of every eye in that town was on him, and even a snake feels pressure. He snatched the coins. "She's yours," he spat, as if selling livestock. Cale didn't flinch. He simply turned, his hand gesturing for Ilara to follow. And she did. She rose from the dust, a broken doll pulled by an invisible string, and followed the blind man out of town, leaving only the sound of whispers and the $5 that had just purchased a soul. What neither of them knew was what was coming, the true cost of that simple, impossible act of defiance. The journey to his home was a trial of silence. Dust rolled off Cale's boots like he'd been on the trail for days, but he never slowed. He led her away from the town, into the harsh, beautiful emptiness of the Badlands where the silence had a pulse and the rocks held the memory of ancient things. Ilara followed, each step a struggle, the baby a leaden weight in her arms. His home wasn't much. Just a small adobe, baked hard by the sun, hunkered down against a mesa as if seeking its protection. Inside, it was cool and dark. He didn't light a lamp, he didn't need one. He moved through the familiar geography of his home with grace, his hands finding a dipper, a bucket of cool water, a clean blanket folded on a cot. He offered her the water first. She drank like a desert creature that had forgotten the feeling of rain. Then he gestured to the cot. She laid the baby down, unwrapping the rags to reveal a tiny, gaunt face. The child was fading, a candle flame about to be snuffed out. Cale stood by the door, a silent guardian, listening to the soft sounds of the woman and child settling into a fragile peace. He had invited the world's trouble into his sanctuary, and the quiet of his life was already gone. Days bled into one another, measured by the slow crawl of shadows across the floor. There were no words. Words, Cale knew, were often just noise that got in the way of truth. He communicated through action. He would leave a bowl of thin broth by the cot. He would take the soiled rags and return with them washed and dried in the sun. He spent an afternoon in the corner, the soft scrape of his knife the only sound, carving a small, smooth piece of cartonwood into a rattle for the baby. He left it beside the sleeping child. Ilara watched him, her eyes wide with a confusion that slowly softened into a fragile kind of wonder. She had only ever known cruelty from men with full sight. This man, who saw nothing, was the first to truly see her. One evening, as a storm gathered on the horizon, she noticed her shawl, the one Blackwood had ripped, lying on the table. It had been mended. The stitches were crude, uneven, done by a man who could only feel the thread and the needle. But they were strong. They held. It was more than a repair, it was a promise. She picked it up, her fingers tracing the rough, careful work, and for the first time since leaving that dusty street, she felt a flicker of something she thought had died. She felt hope. That hope, however, was a fragile thing. Ilara's body, starved and broken, was failing her. The broth he made wasn't enough. The baby, whose name she finally whispered to the darkness was Leah, remained weak. But the child felt the safety of this place. One morning, as Cale sat cleaning a saddle, Leah made a sound. Not a cry of hunger, but a soft, curious coo. It was a sound of life, small but defiant. Cale's hand stilled. He turned his head toward the cot. A slow, rare smile touched his lips. Ilara saw it. She saw the way his entire being attuned to the sound of her daughter's contentment. In that moment, the dam of her silence broke. It wasn't a flood, just a trickle. "Thank you," she whispered. The words were quiet, raspy from disuse, but in the stillness of that adobe hut, they rang like a cathedral bell. It was the first time she had spoken directly to him. For Cale, who lived in a world of sound, her voice was like the first rain on parched earth. It was a beginning. A bond forged not of pity, but of shared humanity. But as the old saying goes, peace is just the quiet time when the devil is reloading. And the devil was on his way. The sound came first. Not fast. Not loud. Just a slow, arrogant beat. The sound of hooves hitting dirt like a war drum. Cale knew that sound. It was the sound of power that didn't care who it trampled. He rose to his feet, his shoulders squared, and moved to the doorway, blocking the entrance with his body. Outside, bathed in the cruel afternoon light, sat Silas Blackwood and two of his cronies. Blackwood dismounted, his boots crunching on the gravel. He had a whip coiled in his hand. "I've come for my property, old man," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. That $5 was just a rental fee. He expected fear. He expected the blind man to step aside. He did not know Cale. The wind began to pick up, kicking dust into the air, shrouding the confrontation in a gritty veil. Cale's hand dropped to his hip, resting near the knife he always carried. He didn't draw it. It was just a reminder of who he was, and what he would do to protect what was inside. But the true confrontation wasn't his to fight alone, and what happened next would change everything. Cale's voice was as flat and hard as the desert floor. "She's not going anywhere," Blackwood laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. He took a step forward, his men fanning out behind him. He raised the whip. "I'll get her myself, and I'll teach you a lesson about interfering," but he stopped. Because the woman, Ilara, was now standing behind Cale. She was frail, leaning on the doorframe for support, but her eyes burned with a fire that eclipsed the sun. She held Leah tight to her chest. She looked past Cale, directly at the man who had tormented her, who had made her a public spectacle. Her voice, no longer a whisper, cut through the wind. "You have no claim on us," she said, each word a stone thrown. "You are a thief and a coward. You are nothing." The power of it stunned everyone into silence. Blackwood's authority was built on her fear, her shame, her silence. And she had just taken it all away from him in front of his own men. He stood there, whip in hand, completely disarmed. His face turned a deep, blotchy red. Humiliation, hot and sharp, had replaced his arrogance. He had been defeated not by a knife, but by a truth he could not deny. The standoff hung in the air, thick and heavy. Blackwood's men looked at him, then at the woman, their own weak convictions crumbling. To press the attack now would be pure, naked cruelty, witnessed not just by them, but by the distant figures of townspeople who had followed, drawn by the scent of conflict. Blackwood saw them watching. He saw their judgment finally turning on him. He spat on the ground, a petty, final act of defiance. Without another word, he turned, climbed back on his horse, and rode away, his cronies scrambling after him like beaten dogs. The threat was gone. The dust began to settle. The war drum of the hooves faded into silence. Cale closed the door, the solid thud sealing them inside their sanctuary. A hard-won peace filled the room. But the battle had taken its toll. Ilara sagged against the door, her final, defiant stand having spent the last of her strength. She slid to the floor, her breathing shallow. Cale knelt beside her, his hand finding hers. He had won the fight, but he was about to face the deepest loss of all. She did not last the night. There was no doctor to call, no medicine that could mend a spirit that had fought its final war. She died in the quiet of the adobe, with the storm finally breaking outside, washing the world clean. Her last moments were spent not in fear, but in peace. Her gaze was fixed on Leah, sleeping soundly on the cot, wrapped in the mended shawl. Her final words were not for herself, but for her child. A whispered promise extracted from the blind man who had become her savior. Protect her, she breathed. Raise her. Let her know the world is not just that town. Cale gave his word. It was a vow spoken into the darkness, witnessed only by the rhythm of the falling rain. He sat with her until the dawn, a silent, stoic sentinel. He had lost again. He had let someone into the fortress of his solitude, only to have them taken away. But this time was different. This time, they had left something behind. They had left him a purpose. He was no longer just a survivor. He was a father. Years passed like seasons across the mesa. Cale raised Leah as his own. He was a man who could not see, teaching a child how to see everything. He taught her to read the direction of the wind by the sound it made in the canyon, to know the time of day by the warmth of a stone, to find water by listening for the hum of bees. She became his eyes, and he became her anchor. Her laughter filled the quiet spaces of the adobe, chasing away the ghosts of loneliness. She grew strong and clever, with her mother's defiant fire and Cale's quiet strength. And the town? The town of redemption began, slowly, to live up to its name. The story of the blind Apache and the woman who spoke truth to power became a quiet legend. People started leaving things on a rock 100 yards from his door. A sack of flour. A pail of milk. A bolt of cloth. They were small offerings of apology. Of respect. He and Leah had built more than a life. They had built a home, and its foundations were so strong they had shifted the ground of an entire community. So, let me ask you this. What does it mean to truly see? The people in redemption had eyes, but they were blind to injustice. Silas Blackwood could see his gold, but he was blind to dignity. It was the blind man, Cale, who saw what mattered. He saw a woman's pain when others saw only shame. He saw a child's future when others saw only a burden. He saw humanity. We all walk through a world full of people crying out in their own silent ways, just hoping someone will notice. This story isn't just about a man in the dust-choked past. It's a challenge to you. It's a question. Who in your world is being overlooked? Who needs to be seen? You don't need $5 silver. All you need is the courage to open your eyes, not the ones in your head, but the ones in your heart, and to take a stand. That is how you change the world. One small, defiant act of seeing at a time.